The thing about the old Granite Peak line was that nobody took it seriously anymore. It was a relic, a rust-scabbed seam stitching together a string of forgotten towns in the deep valleys of the Rockies. The train itself, the Midnight Flyer, it was a joke of a name. It didn't fly, and it certainly didn't run at midnight. It chugged along at a stubborn, geriatric pace every Tuesday and Friday afternoon, hauling a few mail sacks, the occasional piece of farm equipment, and the kind of passengers who had nowhere urgent to be. People like me. My name is Leo. I was a photographer, or at least I wanted to be, fleeing a broken lease and a broken relationship in Denver with a backpack full of camera gear and a head full of vague, romantic notions about capturing the not true. America, though, the city's noise had become a constant, grating hum in my soul, sirens, traffic, the endless digital ping of notifications. The Granite Peak line mentioned on a forgotten travel blog as a journey into Warner's, the quiet heart of the West. Mine sounded like a cure. It was cheap. It was, I thought, harmless. The station at Cedar Fork was little more than a splintered wooden platform, and a sign so bleached by the sun the letters were almost ghosts. The air was thin and clean, smelling of pine sap and dry dust. As the train approached, its whistle wasn't a proud call, but a tired, wheezing sigh that echoed off the surrounding hills. The engine was a diesel workhorse from a bygone era, its paint blistered and faded like a sunburned scalp, pulling 3 passenger cars that looked like they'd been retired from service before I was born. I boarded the last car, the one farthest from the engine's groan, seeking the fullest experience of solitude. The interior was a time capsule from the 1970s, burnt orange upholstery cracked and bleeding yellowed foam, a carpet patterned with ghosts of long-trodden mud, and a chill that seemed to seep from the metal frame itself, a cold that existed regardless of the season. The air carried the thick, layered scent of stale cigarette smoke, mildew, and something else underneath, a faint, sweet odor like old flowers left in a sealed room. There were only a handful of us. Up front, a man in faded overalls, his face a road map of hard living, snored softly, a faded railroad cap pulled low over his eyes. Across the aisle from me, a woman in a neat but dated, floral dress clutched a large patent leather handbag on her lap like it contained all her worldly treasures. Her eyes darted around, never settling, her fingers nervously tracing the clasp. And a few rows ahead on the other side, a young woman with hair the color of spilled ink sat perfectly still, her nose buried in a thick, leather-bound book with no title. She possessed a stillness that felt unnatural, as if she were not just sitting in the carriage, but a part of it. The conductor was a man named Bill, with a thick salt and pepper mustache that hid his upper lip and the weary eyes of someone who had seen the same scenery 1,000 times. He moved with the practiced economy of a man who knew every squeak and rattle of his domain. He punched my ticket with a snap of his heavy metal clipper. "Jasper Creek's the end of the line," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Be there by supper time, provided nothing." Well, provided nothing. He gave a non-committal grunt, his eyes flicking almost imperceptibly toward the window and the approaching wall of mountains. The train gave a lurch and a long, mournful whistle, then began its slow crawl out of Cedar Fork. For the first hour, the journey was exactly what I'd hoped for. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, painting the dusty interior with long, moving bars of gold. I took out my Nikon, capturing the way the light glinted off the chrome ashtrays set into the armrests, the quiet dignity of the sleeping man, the stark, beautiful emptiness of the rocky foothills rolling past. I even sneaked a photo of the young woman with the book, the afternoon light catching the elegant curve of her neck, her intense concentration a portrait in itself. She never flinched, never looked up. It was as if she didn't cast a reflection in the world. Then we began the climb into the Blackwater Gorge. The world outside deepened from a warm afternoon gold to a cool, deep twilight purple. The pine trees crowding the tracks grew taller and more dense, their branches seeming to clutch at the passing train. The granite walls closed in, steep and dark, and the sky became a thin, distant ribbon of fading light before vanishing entirely. We were swallowed by the mountain. The carriage lights, weak and jaundiced to begin with, flickered as if struggling against the pressing darkness. The gentle, rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the wheels, once soothing, now felt like a countdown into the unknown. I put my camera away, a sudden, unaccountable unease settling like a cold stone in my stomach. It was then I noticed the change in the other passengers. The snoring man had woken up. He was sitting bolt upright, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his seat, staring straight ahead as if waiting for an executioner. The woman with the handbag had stopped fidgeting and was now perfectly rigid, nervously twisting a handkerchief into a tight knot, her breathing shallow and rapid. The young woman, however, hadn't moved a muscle. She was now looking out her window, but there was nothing to see except our own ghostly reflections, a tiny pocket of feeble light adrift in an endless ocean of night. I must have dozed off, lulled by the monotony and the growing dread, because I was awakened by a sound that was fundamentally wrong. It wasn't the train's noise. It was a sound on top of it, a high, thin skittering like long, brittle fingernails or the chitinous legs of a vast insect being dragged lightly, playfully, across the metal roof of the carriage. It moved from the front of the car to the back, then back again, as if something were testing the surface, mapping its confines. I sat up, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The old man in overalls was now staring directly at the ceiling, his mouth a tight, fearful slit. The woman with the handbag had pulled her feet up onto the seat, hugging her knees to her chest, her eyes wide with a pure animal terror. Then, without any warning, the lights went out. Not just a flicker, a complete suffocating extinction of all light. The darkness was absolute, a physical weight on the eyes, so deep it seemed to generate a low hum in the ears. The skittering on the roof stopped dead. In the sudden immense silence, the only sounds were the frantic thumping of my own heart, the ragged saw of my breath, and a low, terrified whimper from the woman with the handbag. The train's familiar noises, the wheels, the engine, were gone. We were coasting in a void, untethered from reality, and in that perfect predatory silence, I heard a new sound from the front of the carriage. A wet tearing noise, like Velcro being pulled apart, but organic, horrible. It was followed by a soft, gurgling sigh that ended with a finality that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. "Hello?" My voice was a pathetic, strangled thing, swallowed whole by the oppressive dark. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, my fingers clumsy and numb with panic. I swiped the screen, and the cold blue light pushed back the blackness for a few precious feet around me. I pointed the beam toward the sound, toward the old man's seat. The light illuminated a nightmare. The man was still there, but his body was rigid, back arched unnaturally. A torrent of what looked like living shadow, thick and oily, was pouring from his open mouth. It wasn't just smoke. It had substance coalescing into vague, skittering limbs and grasping tendrils that crawled over his face, absorbing him, digesting him into the darkness. The shadows seemed to drink the light from my phone, dimming the beam where they touched. As I watched, frozen in horror, one of the shadowy forms detached from the mass and scuttled up the wall with spider-like agility, vanishing into the darkness above. A choked, full-throated scream erupted from the woman with the handbag. The darkness around her seemed to pulse and congeal. There was a swift, rustling movement, like 100 dry leaves caught in a sudden whirlwind, and her scream was cut off with a sound like a bundle of twigs being snapped all at once. Then silence again, a deeper, satisfied silence. "Don't!" The voice was a whisper, right next to my ear. I nearly dropped my phone. It was the young woman. She was beside me, her face pale and severe in the phone's ghastly glow. Her eyes were deep pools of fear, but also of a grim, ancient resolve. "It's the silence they want," she breathed. Her voice so low I felt the vibration more than heard the words. The silence between the sounds. That's where they live. Your fear is a bell. Your heartbeat is a drum. You must be quieter than the silence itself. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, who she was, but she pressed a cold finger to my lips. Her touch was like ice. She pointed with her chin toward the far end of the carriage. In the faint periphery of my phone's light, I saw shapes moving. They were indistinct, suggestions of forms. Long, spindly legs, hunched backs, glints of something that might have been eyes. They moved with a jerky insectoid grace, flowing over the seats, clinging to the ceiling like grotesque bats. They were feeding on the silence and on the sounds of our terror. We stood there, frozen statues in the tiny island of light, for what felt like an eternity. I tried to hold my breath to slow my racing heart, each beat echoing in my skull like a cannon shot. The things in the dark moved around us, their presence a cold draft that smelled of damp soil, rotten leaves in the cold, sterile vacuum of deep space. I felt a faint, inquisitive tug on my backpack strap, and a brittle tapping sensation against my leg. like a stick being drawn across my jeans. I squeezed my eyes shut, my mind screaming prayers for the train's noise to return, for this waking dream to end. Suddenly, from the front of the train, a different sound cut through the oppressive quiet. A loud, metallic bang, as if someone had struck a pipe with a sledgehammer. Then another. The conductor, Bill, he was shouting, his voice raw and furious, a human sound defiant in the face of the unnatural. Get back! Get back, you bastards! This is my train. A powerful flashlight beam, a solid shaft of white light, swept through the carriage from the connecting door. The things in the dark recoiled from the light, hissing with a sound like steam escaping a cracked pipe. They melted back into the deeper shadows at the edges of the car, but they didn't vanish. You could feel their malevolent presence just beyond the beam, waiting. Bill stood in the doorway, a formidable silhouette. He held a heavy metal wrench in one hand like a club and the large industrial flashlight in the other. His face was grim, his mustache bristling. "You two, now!" He barked at us, his voice leaving no room for argument. We didn't need telling twice. We stumbled toward him, our legs weak and rubbery. As we passed through the door into the next carriage, he slammed the heavy metal door shut and spun the locking wheel with a grunt. He leaned against it, breathing heavily. This carriage was identical to the first, but mercifully empty. The lights here were on, flickering but functional, feeling like a sanctuary. "What, in God's name, what were those things?" I gasped, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. Bill ignored me for a moment, looking past me at the young woman. Ilara, cutting it close again. She was curious about him. "The young woman," Ilara said, nodding toward me. Her voice was calm, but there was a tremor underneath. They all were. A new sound, a fresh voice. "This is a bad one," Bill muttered, wiping his brow with a red bandana. "Worse than last fall. The veil's thin as tissue paper tonight." He finally looked at me, his eyes hard and weary. "You picked a hell of a day for a scenic tour, son," he explained as we moved quickly through the next car, heading toward the engine. The Blackwater Gorge, he said, wasn't just a geological feature. It was a place, a thin spot. The things that lived there were old, older than the mountains. They weren't ghosts or demons, not in any biblical sense. They were primordial, creatures of silence and stillness, entities that existed in the spaces between noises. The train, with its light and sound, was an intrusion, a loud, bright needle stitching through their realm. Most of the time they ignored it, the way a river ignores a stone. But sometimes, when the conditions were right, a certain phase of the moon, a particular atmospheric pressure, a collective quietness in the souls aboard, they noticed. And they got hungry. "The train has to go silent through the deepest part of the gorge," Bill said, his voice low. "The brakes, the engine, everything. It's the only way. We cut the power and coast through. Making any sound, any at all, is like ringing a dinner bell. A shout, a scream, even a loud whisper." "And the passengers?" I asked, the dread coiling in my gut like a serpent. Bill's face darkened. He looked at the floor. "Most sleep through it. They're part of the quiet. Sometimes someone wakes up. Sometimes we're lucky and they keep their heads. Sometimes we aren't. Ilara's family, they've been the caretakers of this stretch for generations. They haven't..." Understanding. A private stop. She boards to watch, to warn if she can. To maintain the balance, we reach the engine cab. It was a small, hot space filled with dials and levers that glowed with a faint greenish light. The engineer, a gaunt, ashen-faced man with a haunted look in his eyes, just nodded grimly at us, his hands gripping the control lever like a lifeline. Through the massive front window, there was only an impenetrable blackness, as if we were piloting a ship through a starless sea. "We're almost through," the engineer whispered, his voice cracking. "The worst of it is just ahead. The heart of the gorge. Just a few more minutes." But then a new sound started. A low, rhythmic thumping coming from the roof of the cab. Thump, thump, thump. It was heavy, deliberate, powerful. With each impact, a new dent appeared in the metal ceiling directly above our heads. "They know we're in here," Bill said, hefting his wrench. His knuckles were white. "They're not letting us go this time. They're angry." Ilara stepped forward. She opened her leather-bound book. I saw now that it wasn't filled with words, but with strange, intricate symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the dim green light of the cab. She began to chant, her voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my bones and teeth. It wasn't a loud sound, but it was a complex one, filled with layers and conflicting frequencies, a sonic shield. The thumping on the roof ceased, replaced by a frustrated, furious scratching. The sound of claws on metal. "They're understanding," Bill said to me, seeing my confusion. "She's creating a sound too complex for them to digest. A sound that pushes them away. A protection charm made of noise." But the strain was evident on Alara's face. Beads of sweat stood out on her forehead and upper lip. Her voice began to waver. The scratching grew more frantic, more insistent. Suddenly, with a shriek of tearing metal, a long bone-white claw, jointed in too many places, ripped through the ceiling, swiping blindly for her. Bill reacted with a speed that belied his age, swinging his wrench in a short, brutal arc. It connected with the limb with a sickening, crunchy crack. The claw retracted with a screech, but more began to punch through from other points, peeling back the roof like a tin can. The cold, dank air of the gorge poured in, and with it, the overwhelming smell of the grave. We weren't going to make it. The sonic shield was failing. The physical barrier was being shredded. I acted on pure, desperate instinct. I scrambled with my backpack, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the zipper. I grabbed my camera, switching it on. I twisted the lens, turning on the built-in video light, a searingly bright LED beam, and pointed it directly at the ruptured ceiling. Then I started firing the camera's shutter, the loud mechanical click whir echoing like gunshots in the confined space. It was a sharp, artificial, aggressive sound, the antithesis of the natural silence the creatures craved. The things recoiled from both the strobing light and the harsh noise. I kept firing, clicking the shutter again and again, moving the beam around, creating a chaotic, painful dissonance for the entities of silence. It was working. The claws retracted. The frantic scratching faded into a frustrated, receding chatter. My absurd modern noise was a weapon they had no defense against. At that exact moment, the train erupted back into life. The engine roared with a sound more beautiful than any symphony. The lights in the cab blazed brightly. The wheels found their familiar rhythm on the tracks. Clack, clack, clack. We burst out of the gorge into the soft, rose-colored light of a peaceful early evening. The world was suddenly blessedly normal. Pine trees stood tall and solid. A river sparkled in the distance, and the sky was a vast, welcoming dome of pastel colors. We stood in the cab, breathing in the clean, pine-scented air, none of us speaking. The engineer sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Bill leaned against the control panel, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. After a long moment, he clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Quick thinking, kid. Damn quick thinking." Alara closed her book. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. A mixture of gratitude and something else. Pity. "You introduced a new sound," she said softly. "A sound they've never tasted before. They will remember it. They will remember you." We pulled into the next station, a small, sleepy town called Oak Bend. I gathered my things on shaky legs, my mind still reeling. As I stepped onto the solid wooden platform, the ground felt unreal, insubstantial. Bill leaned out of the cab. "You tell anyone about this," he said. Not unkindly, but with a tone of finality. "They'll think you're crazy. But you've seen it now. A piece of the true America." He gave a wry, tired smile and waved as the train began to pull away, continuing its journey. I stood there watching it go. And as the last passenger car passed, I looked. And there in the window I saw it. Not Alara. It was a pale, elongated face with eyes that were solid black pits, deep and empty. Its mouth was stretched into a silent, knowing grin. It wasn't a look of immediate threat, but of recognition, of a debt recorded. It pressed a long, thin, bone-white finger against the glass, leaving a faint, greasy smudge. And then it was gone, swallowed by the distance and the growing twilight. I never took my photographs. The ones I had shot were blurry, dark, and showed nothing but empty, mundane seats. I never found the true America I was looking for. Instead, I found a deeper, darker one lurking just beneath the surface of things. I spent the rest of my days in well-lit, noisy places jumping at sudden silences, my heart seizing up whenever the power flickered. I was forever haunted by the knowledge that there are older, hungrier paths in the world. Paths we built our railroads over without asking. We build our lives, making our noise and our light, believing we are the masters of our domain. But sometimes we are just temporary, noisy intruders passing through the dark, quiet places where something else, something ancient and patient and utterly alien, is always waiting for the silence to fall.